Hi, I'm Sara Bush. This is my very first episode of Nowhere Near Done, and it feels a little vulnerable to even be doing this, but I am also really excited about it. This is a podcast for women in that middle space where things are shifting and maybe not everything feels like it used to. You may be going through perimenopause or just learning what that is. But ultimately, you know your body is changing and you feel like things are shifting, and this is a space to talk openly and honestly about all of it. It's just been a calling for me to provide a space for women to have these really open and honest conversations about this phase of life so that we feel less alone and that we feel like we are supported. So, a little bit about me. I actually started out wanting to be a journalist, but in college, I had a professor I really respected tell me I was too sensitive for it and that I probably should go in another direction. And I think that that stuck with me more than I realized. And when you're first starting out, a lot of times you have to move to a small town and find a job in a tiny little market. And I didn't feel up for that either. Instead, I took the path of least resistance and I just continued to wait tables after college. And I kind of floated for a while. I did get a job working in editing for a production company and I did some marketing, but I didn't really feel settled. And eventually I decided to give journalism a try. And I moved home, got an internship at a local TV station. And I remember walking into the newsroom for the first time, and it honestly felt like Mecca. Like I knew this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I had to work really hard still to get an opportunity to become a reporter, which is what I really wanted to do. I spent a lot of time behind the scenes for the first couple of years, filling in wherever I could. Eventually, I did get that job as a reporter and eventually as an anchor as well. And I loved it. And I never once regretted going for it and doing that. But something I didn't expect was how much my identity would become tied to that role in a smaller market. People recognize you in the grocery store. They recognize you at the gas station, and it becomes part of how you see yourself. And eventually, when I left, I really had to grapple with who I was without that. And honestly, I struggled. There was a point when I thought about focusing more on writing, which I did love. And of course, someone made a comment, kind of dismissive, but kind of snarky about, what are you going to do? Start a blog. And I really let that get to me. Again, I let that self doubt creep back in. And I have let people's opinions of me, or at least my perception of people's opinions, dictate a lot of my choices over the years. I did leave TV news. I wrote for a newspaper for several years, and that felt a little bit better. Stories could be more in depth. I didn't have to put on makeup, felt less exposed, but I still got to do the parts of the job which I loved, which was telling people's stories. And eventually I got married and had kids, and I did leave the news business, and my identity slowly became mother. I became a ghostwriter. I've also started a marketing and PR company. And now I'm at a place where I feel like I need to do the things that are really for me. And I think all of that, all the pivots, all the doubts, figuring it out has actually brought me to a place where I do know myself better. Of course, I still doubt myself all the time, but I feel less pressure to do what other people think that I should. And then, of course, this phase started perimenopause. And for me, it looked first like joint pain. I was only 38 and I remember waking up and my hands hurt so bad. And I thought that maybe I had arthritis. And I went to the doctor and I had several tests done. He sent me to several specialists and they couldn't find anything wrong. All my tests were normal. Nothing seemed out of place. And so basically, he dismissed me as like, you're getting older and this is just kind of part of it. And that was a bummer. And I think then as the years went on a little bit, sleeplessness became an issue, having a really hard time sleeping or waking up in the middle of the night and having those racing thoughts and the anxiety and having a really hard time sleeping. And then the joint pain continued. I started to gain weight again. I mean, after finally working so hard after having kids to lose all that weight, I started seeing the weight creep up again. And it was like, no matter what I did, no matter what I ate, no matter how hard I worked out, I could not lose the weight. The mood shifts. I mean, my gosh, no patience for anybody, for my husband, for my kids. Like I felt like a rubber band being pulled so tight and any little thing just was going to set me off. I just felt like I had no patience left. I just felt off in my body, in my mind. And for a long time, I did not even realize what was happening. I think compounded on this, I've always been a runner. I've run since I was like 13, not just for the physical movement, but also I think it's a huge part of my mental health because with running, I could go for miles and just sort of let my mind go where it needed to go and process things that needed to be processed. And so as I was starting to have this joint pain and the weight gain, it was harder for me to move my body like I always had. And running no longer felt enjoyable. It became painful and depressing because it was hard to not be able to do it the way I had always done before. But then I think it's like this vicious cycle because without the running, I didn't have that mental outlet. And so I think then I'd feel worse. And all of that to say, I found an OBGYN who had been specifically studying and becoming really educated in perimenopause. And I'd heard the word menopause before, but I had never heard perimenopause, which is it can be up to 10 years before you actually go through menopause, which is when you stop having a period. Like after you haven't had a period for a year, you've been through menopause. But there's this whole period of time prior to that where all of these symptoms start occurring or can occur because our hormones are like fluctuating all over the place. So started to work for this OBGYN. She was a client of ours for our marketing business, and I started learning a lot about perimenopause and realizing that that's what was going on with me. It wasn't just aging, or at least I didn't have to accept these symptoms as normal. And I realized that with her help, I was able to manage a lot of these symptoms with HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. I started an estrogen patch, a very low dose estrogen patch, and progesterone. Slept better almost immediately after taking the progesterone. The estrogen, I think, has helped immensely with my moods and my ability to have patience again. Another thing that I did, which is a really personal decision, was that I did take GLP-1s to help with weight loss. Again, I think as women, we tie so much of how we feel with how we look. And when I would be invited out with friends and I would make up an excuse not to go, not because I didn't want to be around them, because really ultimately I probably would have just felt so much better had I gone. But I think it was just more that idea of like, I'd have to put on some clothes that aren't sweatpants. But I found myself just being so uncomfortable in my body. There was a day I remember so specifically. We had been on vacation and I saw myself in a bathing suit in a picture, and it really messed with my head because I have tried so hard to be accepting of my body. As women, I know that this is something that we all struggle with, and accepting and loving ourselves who we are as we are, whatever size. It's tough. And aging is tough. Seeing the wrinkles and seeing, our faces and our bodies change is so hard. I called my OBGYN and just saying like, please, can you help me? I've had friends who've done the GLP-1s. I really want to just give it a try. And thankfully, she supported me in that. And so I did it in a way, I went and did testing. I had a doctor supervising, but I was able to lose some weight. And that helped me mentally. I was able to start running again. And that shifted a lot of things. I felt like my mental health improved because I was able to get out there and do the thing that I had always loved. I think that we need to talk more as women, especially in this phase of life, about how do we find ways to feel good about ourselves that aren't tied to how we look. I want to really explore that. I struggle with this because I think we should just be more accepting of our bodies. I have a daughter. I want to teach her that she's beautiful and she is worthy and she is important no matter how she looks, and that her looks are the least interesting thing about her. And I will be having some guests on here in the future that are really going to dive into those topics. And I'm really excited to talk about the different ways that we can support each other in both. If you choose to take a GLP-1, I feel like there should be no judgment around that either because we should be supporting each other. Same thing with the HRT. I think that there are women who swear by it. I'm one of them. It's helped me tremendously. I think it's kind of changed my life, but I know that there are women who feel really strongly against it. There are also women who can't. I have a friend who, because of her specific health issues, she cannot take HRT. So again, everybody is so different. And I think the biggest part is just supporting each other in all of this and being open about our own experiences too, so that we can find that common ground. And the more open we can be, the less alone that we'll feel in all of it. And so I just think that's the biggest part for me, is wanting to understand what we're going through and then building that community around it so that we can really just feel like we can open up and have conversations and talk about the things that are hard, and maybe figure out what's going to work best for you, and then support you in whatever you decide to do. Around the time that I was wrapping up my PR and marketing business, I had been really feeling pulled to do something specifically for women. Through my work, both in journalism and ghostwriting, I have seen how powerful stories are. And in my life, and sharing honestly with other women, and then hearing their stories in return, it has helped me through some of the hardest periods of time. Early motherhood was actually the first time I thought about doing something like this. I struggled for a few years, really struggled with loneliness. All of a sudden I went from being in this very public space where I was around people all the time. I got to be very social. And then I was basically in my house with these babies, seeing no one. And that was, that's on me. I did not take advantage of the mother groups and the different opportunities that I'd had to get out of the house. It's all tied in to how I felt about myself and how I looked. I had gained weight from having babies. And I just kind of locked myself into my own little prison. And so I struggled. It was really, really hard. And I remember when my son first started preschool was the first time that I met other moms that were going through the same thing as me, and made some friends who I felt comfortable kind of opening up and sharing with. I mean, it is so important for us to find other groups of women to lean on and to support them, and then allow them to support us. At that time, I remember sitting around with some of these moms, and we would let the kids play. And I just remember thinking, we should be talking about all of these struggles more openly. We need to be having these conversations more often. I feel like similar to that early motherhood once again, because it's like this new phase of life that feels really uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And I don't feel like we're talking about it enough. And so this is my way of supporting women. And I'm going to be as open and vulnerable and honest as I can possibly be, to hopefully make it a safe space for you to do the same thing. That's what this Nowhere Near Done is going to be all about, these honest conversations, this phase of life, perimenopause, relationships, your identity and your purpose. So many of us spent our 20s and 30s building our careers and our families and really putting everything into that. And I think now what I'm seeing is a lot of us are kind of stepping back and going, okay, wait a minute. What about me? Like, what do I want? And what is going to make me happy? Because at the end of the day, I mean, this is it. We have this one life. And I just feel like this is the time that we can examine our lives and figure out, am I where I want to be? Is there something more? I don't think that this has to be the end. If we are completely starting over at this phase, I mean, I keep seeing the memes on social media about women entrepreneurs starting in their 40s, becoming millionaires, whatever it is. I don't think that the money has to be the focus at all. I think at this point, maybe it's just spending more time with your family, if that's what it is that feels really good, or building these communities of women, whatever it is that lights you up, whatever it is that you feel is going to give you purpose in this phase of life. So not only will I be talking to experts, OBGYNs, family therapists, health professionals, but I will also be talking to women who have incredible stories. I think so many times it's the women that are just busy doing daily life. And then you get to talking and you realize like how incredible they are. I'm so fortunate to have so many incredible women who are just so inspiring, but very under the radar. Something that has really inspired me, one podcast that I love that I listen to is Amy Poehler's Good Hang. And she interviews celebrities, but she has this way of making them feel so human and relatable. And I always talk about this. There'll be people on there who I typically would hear their name and think, okay, I'm not super interested or not a huge fan of them. But the way she is able to talk to them and pull out these stories, they feel very relatable. And I love that. I kind of want to do the reverse of that. I want to talk to the everyday, ordinary woman, but in a way that shows just how extraordinary their stories are. Because I really believe when we hear other women's stories, we can see ourselves in them. And when we see ourselves in other women and realize how extraordinary they are, maybe it will help us to see just how extraordinary that we all are. We all have stories worth telling. We all have things that if we shared them, somebody out there is going to need to hear what you've been through because they're going through it too. And I just think the most important part, this is a space for no judgment. Often, if we have um, a specific thing that we've done, we feel very strongly about like that's the way to do it, or this is the only way. And I just don't think that that's true. I think, the biggest thing is being curious and actually listening to other people's stories and maybe understanding better why it is that they feel the way that they feel or they are making decisions that they're making really as women rather than tearing each other down or feeling competition. I just want us to support each other. And that's really what this is about, is just creating that space for honesty and no judgment. There is so much noise about what we should be doing, how we should be handling our bodies and this phase. And I just don't think there's one right way. What worked for me may not be right for somebody else, but also it's my journey. And so I also don't think that it needs to be open for your judgment, and don't need to worry about what I did. If it helps you, fantastic. But in no way am I promoting anyone do what I did. I think, what worked for me, and that's it. I want to give people information so they can make choices for themselves. But ultimately, I really just want to be here to support you and whatever it is that you want to do in this phase, because I believe that we need each other more than ever. We don't need to fix each other, but we do need to remind each other that we are not alone. And so if you are here listening, I am so glad you are. And I would love to hear from you about what it is that you would like to talk about more. If there are other things you specifically want to talk about, or women who inspire you or who make you feel good. That is what we'll be doing on this podcast in the future. I am so looking forward to starting these conversations. I would love for it to be a very open dialogue and to hear from everyone who's listening.